Grab your favorite beverage. It's time for the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast.
What's up, fantasy freaks and geeks? Welcome to part 2, week 5 of the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. I started part 1 kind of bragging about myself and all the great calls that I made in week 4. And I figured I'd keep the whole selfish thing going here and open up part 2 by bitching about my lineup in my oldest league. So I got my first 2 picks, Devontae Adams and Tyreek Hill are both probably going to miss this week. Chris Godwin, the guy that's kind of been keeping me afloat, I'm 2-2 in this league. He is questionable. He was questionable all last week, but he still played. So I'm really hoping that I can keep him in my lineup. 2 weeks ago, I was able to pick up Wayne Gallman. I started him, and he got me a bunch of points. But he's questionable, and he's got a tough matchup. What else here? I got Carry-On on the bye. It's rough for me right now. I got Lamar Jackson and Aaron Rodgers, which is great, but you can't start both of them, and have not been successful yet in finding a trade partner for one of them. So it's most likely going to be a rough week for the San Jose Slapdicks in this week 5 here, but that's why you play in multiple leagues. That way, if you suck in one of them, you still have another one to be really good, and in my case, another 7 chances to be good. 8 leagues. I thought I'd be okay, but Tuesday nights is really killing me with all these waiver additions I got to make. I got to figure out a way to streamline that whole process. So here in part 2, we're going to do the NFC home games first. Then me and Chris are going to work together to come up with our 3-team parlay of the week. I'm going to really start pushing him towards maybe looking at some of the over-unders too, instead of just looking at teams against the point spread. Because we got to get a win here. So and then we'll finish out the episode looking at all of the AFC home games. So we're going to start with the Jaguars at the Panthers here. Jags coming off of that win against the Broncos. Panthers coming off a win against the Texans. We finally got a 25-plus touch game for Leonard Fournette, and like in most games that he sees that kind of volume, he had a huge day, huge second half, had a couple big runs, and that's what happens when you got a big, huge running back like that just beating your ass all day long, and defense get tired, and they don't want anything to do with you at the end of the game. So hopefully this Jaguars team, can look at this game plan, and I know they've been giving Fournette the opportunities. He's just been facing stacked boxes and super stacked boxes pretty much all season. So, but with Gardner Minshew playing so well, he's now got 7 touchdowns and just 1 interception, which came in week 1 against the Chiefs when he came in relief for Nick Foles. Maybe we'll see some of the defenses play him a little more honest, and not load up against the run as much, which would be great for us Leonard Fournette owners. As far as the wide receivers go, Westbrook and Shark remain the only heavily targeted guys on this offense besides Leonard Fournette. Keelan Cole and Marquise Lee have pretty much been completely phased out of this past game. Kind of weird how I remember last year they were two guys that we were looking at as maybe late round flyers, and now they seem like they've just been cast away. So I'm sitting all the Jaguars in this game except for Leonard Fournette. The Panthers' pass defense is really good. They're allowing the 7th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks, the 5th fewest to wide receivers, and the 4th fewest to tight ends. So they're really stopping the pass, and they're kind of making you beat them running the ball. Couldn't be a better game for Leonard Fournette here. As far as the Panthers go, McCaffrey with 37 touches and about 180 total yards last week. Had a touchdown with it. This is just insane for one of the smaller running backs in the league to be targeted 10 times on top of giving the ball 27 times on the ground. It's just wild. So this offense is clearly running through him. Kind of strange to me. Jarius Wright caught more passes and was targeted more than DJ Moore last week. Second straight week with Kyle Allen playing quarterback that Moore was fourth on the team in targets. Honestly, I'm going to sit Moore this week in this matchup if Jalen Ramsey plays. If he doesn't, then I'm fine with firing him up for another week, and hopefully we see DJ Moore get a little more involved in this pass game. He's kind of been lacking in the production there. So Kyle Allen hasn't been playing bad despite all of his turnovers, but he's got to look for DJ Moore a little bit more. I think more and more. We got the Minnesota Vikings going to play the New York Football Giants at MetLife Stadium. The Vikings coming off of that loss to the Bears, 16-6, and then the Giants lost to the Redskins. So both teams coming off of a division loss. Dalvin Cook with a 16-point game against this one of the hardest matchups for running backs. He had the fumble, but you got to be encouraged by what he was able to do, and that in a close game, Alex Madison, however you say it, only got 3 touches. Dalvin Cook is clearly, I don't expect this offense to change all that much. I think he's the man going forward for sure. If I was a Stephon Diggs owner, however, I would be trying to sell him. If I was an Adam Thielen owner, I'd be trying to sell him. There was rumors of Diggs wanting a trade, to be traded to another team, and we had the whole thing with Thielen and Cousins. Thielen kind of saying, we got to push the ball down the field more, we got to complete more of these deep passes, and of course Kirk Cousins went on the radio and apologized for it. So I think this is a week where we see them used a little bit more than we have, just the squeaky wheel gets the grease type of thing. I think this head coach, although he clearly wants to run the ball and play defense, I think he's got to know that both of his star wide receivers are not happy at all, and they gotta do a little bit more. Last year it was, we don't run the ball enough, and now this year it's we run the ball too much. So they got to find this balance, and I think this is kind of the ceiling for this pass game here. 36 pass attempts. 6, 7, and 8 targets to Thielen, Diggs, and Cook. I know this was the Bears, but these are 2 wide receivers that are going to consistently frustrate you unless they figure out how to find this balance here. There's no reason, as good as Dalvin Cook is, there's no reason why he should be leading the team in targets. I think that's kind of more of what Adam Thielen was saying. I don't think he's upset with how many times he was targeted. I think he's more so upset with how many times Kirk Cousins was content with just dumping the ball down to Dalvin Cook instead of pushing it down to these 2 really good wide receivers. So on the Giants side of the ball, I thought it was weird. At the end of the half, after Ingram made a bunch of good plays, they targeted Cody Lattimore in the end zone on the goal line with 6 seconds left instead of drawing something up for Ingram. I remember what happened. I'm sitting there watching with my girlfriend. I'm like, what are they doing? She's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But it's strange. And then again, after Dwayne Gallman scored twice, they got the ball down into the red zone again, and on 1st and goal, they give the ball to John Hilleman, who fumbles. I know Gallman had a fumble later in the game himself, but it's just like, give the ball to Gallman. You know what I mean? This team, I really don't think this team's going to be going anywhere. For us fantasy owners, we need Gallman to get the ball there. We need Ingram to get the ball there, not these other guys. So hopefully this week we don't see any more vultured red zone opportunities for our big-time players. Sterling Shepard with 9 targets in a blowout was good to see. With Golden Tate returning, this is going to be the first game that he plays. So we'll see how much that affects Sterling Shepard's target share. I know he missed a game or 2 earlier in the season anyway, but I think this offense is starting to come together. If they get Golden Tate back, give maybe a couple weeks without Saquon Barkley to really work on opening up the pass game with Daniel Jones, and then when Saquon comes back, they can go right back to giving him the 20+ touches that he deserves. And it's crazy. You've seen highlights on SportsCenter and NFL Network and wherever else, CBS. Saquon's already back on the field, running, cutting, sprinting. The dude just had a high ankle sprain 2 weeks ago. He's pretty ridiculous. So the Giants are clearly going to go through Saquon when he's healthy, but I think for the next week or two, these wide receivers, maybe somebody you're going to want to keep an eye on. I'm not going to start him this week against the Vikings because that defense is real tough, but just keep an eye on this offense. It might have been one of the more forgotten offenses with the prospect of Eli being at the helm, but Daniel Jones has really showed us something so far. Moving on to the Patriots at the Redskins, which should be another boring-ass game. Tom Brady last week looked subpar against the Bills' defense, completed less than half of his passes. It was a beautiful thing. I was really hoping the Bills were going to pull this one out, but just too many turnovers by Josh Allen, which we'll get to in the AFC home games later. But James White returned after missing week 3 to be with his family, birth of his baby, and with Julian Edelman dealing with some rib and chest injuries, James White led the team in targets, catches, and yards. He's just a monster in PPR leagues. The only Patriot to score last week, however, was the longtime special teamers Brandon Bolden. Sonny Michel played okay, but against a great Bills defense, you got to cut him a little bit of slack. But he hasn't been playing all that great this year, and I'm sure seeing that touchdown go to Bolden, albeit on a push pass, must have been very frustrating for those Michel owners. Michel with only one game so far, with over 7 fantasy points on the season. Definitely worried about him. Waiting for Josh Gordon to take this opportunity that he has. He's playing with one of, if not the best quarterback of all time. He's in a great system. This team needs an outside threat. Julian Edelman and James White are clearly going to be getting all those middle of the field, dump off, option route type of targets, but they need somebody that they can push the ball down the field with besides Phillip Dorsett. And Josh Gordon only caught 3 of his 7 targets last week. He's got to take this opportunity and run with it. I don't know if he's going to get another one. He's in a perfect spot here, so I'm really hoping after a 3-catch game last week that he can kind of and the Bills are a tough defense, but this Redskins defense is allowing the second most fantasy points to wide receivers right now. So if it doesn't happen this week, I don't know if it's going to. I got him stashed in my bench in one of my leagues, and I'm really hoping I can bust him out. As far as the Redskins go, I don't care who's starting at quarterback. Last week we saw 4 turnovers. Keenum threw a pick 6. Haskins came in and threw 3 interceptions for himself. Chris Thompson was the leading receiver by a lot. This offense is going to look really bad against the Patriots defense, especially if Terry McLaurin doesn't suit up and play. He missed week 4, which gave an opportunity to Trey Quinn and Paul Richardson, who did not capitalize on it. They combined for 5 catches on the 9 targets that they got for only 24 yards. Thompson and maybe McLaurin are really the only Redskins worth playing. I might want to wait a week for McLaurin, really. Sure, he's not somebody that you've been counting on as a solid starter all year, so you can afford to give him another week against this Patriots defense, which is, I think, just going to absolutely smother this Redskins team. They take away what you do best. They're going to stop the run. They're going to make one of these quarterbacks throw the ball. Obviously, dumping it down to Chris Thompson. I don't know if the Patriots are just going to let him consistently dump the ball down and come up and make tackles, or if they're going to crowd the line of scrimmage and make him throw the ball, push the ball down the field, give those awesome defensive backs that the Patriots have opportunities to make plays on the ball. So we will see. I have Chris Thompson in one of my leagues, that league that I was just talking about to start this episode off, and I'm very torn on whether or not I should be playing him or Wayne Gallman this week. Moving on to my New York Football Jets playing in Philadelphia, playing the Eagles. Jets coming off of a bye. This is going to be the last game without Chris Herndon. And we're still not sure whether or not Sam Darnold is going to play. He's been practicing all week. Apparently, everyone's saying that he looks good. But, we're just going to have to wait and see Sunday morning whether or not he's going to play. And this is a really good matchup for the passing game coming off of a bye, having that extra week to, game plan and whatnot if Sam Darnold is to play. The Eagles are allowing the 5th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. They're also allowing the most points to wide receivers and the 8th most receptions to running backs. So Le'Veon Bell, who has been one of the most prolific pass-catching running backs his whole career, he's been the most targeted Jet week 2 and 3. So I expect him to have a huge game again. If Darnold plays, like I said, I'm going to play Crowder. I'm playing Robbie Anderson, busting out all the Jets if Darnold plays. As far as the Eagles go, Jordan Howard with the game of his life, including receiving touchdown, one of his 3 touchdowns. The knock on Howard has always kind of been that his limitations in the pass game, but last week he looked great catching the ball out of the backfield. He was targeted 4 times, the most he's been targeted since week 2 of last year. He had 4 more carries than Sanders did, so and Sanders was only targeted once. He had over 100 total yards. He's got a decent matchup here against the Jets, who rank right outside the top 10 in fantasy points allowed to running backs. So I think Jordan Howard is worth a play. I'm sure a lot of people picked him up off the waiver wire if anybody had drafted him and dropped him or whatever. Ertz is having a down year here for sure. Still yet to score. His best game this year was an 8-catch, 72-yard game that he only caught half of his targets. By the normal tight end measure, this is a great game, but he's not a normal tight end. We didn't draft him as a normal tight end. We drafted him as a top-tier receiver, not just wide receiver or tight end, just a pass catcher. And we expect more from him. So he's got a tough matchup here as well against the Jets, who actually allow the 3rd fewest fantasy points to tight ends. So he's going to have to earn it if he's going to get back into that top echelon of tight ends that we always talk about. Moving down to the NFC South, we got the Buccaneers playing at the Saints. Bucs coming off of that big win in Los Angeles, 55-40 against the Rams. Saints coming off of a nice win in which they kicked 4 field goals against the Cowboys, 12-10. Winston back-to-back 380-plus yard games, 7 touchdowns in the last 2 games. If you listen to part 1 to our daily our FanDuel lineup of the week, we're going with Jameis Winston this week. Maybe we're starting to see this Bruce Arians magic come out. I know a lot of people were kind of expecting that. I myself was. I kind of got caught up in the hype of it. Plus, he's got the matchup. The Saints are allowing the 2nd most fantasy points to quarterbacks this season. So, it's looking good for Winston and the Bucs again here. As an O.J. Howard owner in one league, I am definitely nervous about his outlook this season. In a game that Jameis threw 40 times and the Bucs put up almost 500 total yards, Howard was only targeted 3 times, and the only red zone target that went to a Buccaneers tight end went to Cameron Brate, which has kind of been his MO his entire career. I actually picked up Tyler Eifert this week, and I dropped O.J. Howard in that league that I also have Chris Herndon. I'm waiting for him to come back next week, but we'll talk about we'll talk about Tyler Eifert's situation in the AFC home games. But yeah, I mean, O.J. Howard's just it's not there, man. It's just not there. He's was drafted as one of these super talented tight ends, and it's just not working out for him so far. Speaking of another super talented guy drafted high, Ronald Jones may be breaking out here with back-to-back 12-point fantasy point games. Had the first touchdown of the season last week. In episode RB before the season started, I outlined the extensive list of 1,000-plus yard running backs that have played for Bruce Arians. And if you look at the Saints D so far this year, they've completely flipped their run defense. In week 1 and 2, they allowed almost 300 total yards to the Texans running backs and the Rams running backs. And then week 3 versus Seattle, who led the team in rushing last year, they held Chris Carson to 50 yards. Last week, they held Zeke to 35 rushing yards. So Saints defense is actually playing really well against running backs altogether. 5th fewest fantasy points to running backs. They're allowing the 3rd fewest receiving yards to running backs. So it's a tough matchup for him, which is why I'm not going to panic if Ronald Jones goes out and has another bad game. he's got the Panthers in week 6, and if you look at what the Panthers have done against the run so far this year, 100-yard game to Gurley and in week 1, plus a 53-yard and 2 touchdown game to Malcolm Brown. In week 2 against Tampa Bay, the Panthers allowed Ronald Jones's teammate Peyton Barber to have 90 total yards and a touchdown. In week 3, they allowed a 15-point fantasy game to David Johnson, and in week 4 they allowed 100 rush yards to the combo of Carlos Hyde and Duke Johnson. So this week's probably not the best matchup to play Ronald Jones, but next week definitely is. So if you picked him up excited, hoping that he's kind of made that turn, and then he has a bad performance against the Saints, don't get discouraged. He's got a good matchup next week. Give him one more week next week, and if he still is, kind of trotting and they're going back and forth between these two backs, then maybe he isn't worth starting. But I'm very much excited about him. I think we're starting to see him emerge as a legitimate running back option for us in fantasy. With the Saints, a rare no touchdown, under 100 total yards game for Alvin Kamara. As I said before, the team didn't score a touchdown at all. They just kicked 4 field goals, and it was enough to win. Michael Thomas still gave you a great game, 95 yards, catching all 9 of his targets. And with this Saints D kind of vulnerable to the pass game, I wonder if the Buccaneers kind of jump out to an early lead like they did against the Rams. Will Teddy Bridgewater really have the ability to keep up in a shootout type game? He's obviously got the weapons around him to do it. Kamara and Michael Thomas will be just fine. But this could be the floor going forward without Breeze. A 14-point game, you'll take that any day, whether it's a wide receiver 1 or a wide receiver 3. But this may be I'm not saying a touchdown-less game, but, all I'm saying is we really need Drew Brees back. Can't come back soon enough. Moving on to the Packers playing at the Cowboys. Unfortunately, we saw Jamal Williams go down with an ugly hit to the head in week 4. He's in concussion protocol, so we have no idea when he'll be back. But it was to Aaron Jones' benefit, obviously. Jones targeted 7 times last week. His target share seems to vary depending on the opponent. But with no Jamal Williams versus this Cowboys D that gives up the 8th fewest fantasy points to running backs, I'm not sure how much Jones is going to do on in the run game. But they also allow, they're in the top 6 in most receptions and receiving yards allowed to running backs. So look for another good game for Jones catching the ball, not so much running the ball. He's only averaging 3.3 yards per carry this season. So I think I'm going to start him in standard leagues and I'm going to sit him in PPR leagues. It was a big day for Devontae Adams in week 4, 10 catches on 15 targets for 180 yards. He just missed a touchdown on that one long run. But it, was kind of a bad game, too, for him because now he's got this toe injury. Opened the door for Jimmy Graham, who caught 6 of his 9 targets for 60 yards and a touchdown. He converted his red zone target and scored. If Jones misses, I think Jimmy Graham is definitely worth playing. This Cowboys D ranks in the top 8 for fewest fantasy points allowed to all 4 of the skill positions except for tight end. So maybe Jimmy Graham can go circa 2011 here. For the Packers, and they had 10 days to prepare for this game coming off of the Thursday night football, just like the Eagles did. It gives them a little more time to get healthy, gives them a little more time to scheme some stuff up. So hopefully if Devontae Adams is not able to come in and play, hopefully we get some production out of Jimmy Graham, because it would definitely help to have another guy in this pool of tight ends to kind of stream from. Looking at the Cowboys, I expect a bounce-back game for Zeke, who last week got completely neutralized by the Saints' run defense. Had to have been one of Zeke's worst career games. But the Packers allow the 3rd most fantasy points to running back, so he's got the matchup to kind of bounce back here. Zeke will be without Pro Bowl left tackle Tyron Smith, which will probably give the Cowboys coaching staff all the more reason to run the ball even more. Usually anytime you see one of these top-tier left tackles miss, the coaching staff, maybe instead of throwing the ball 33 times, they throw the ball 28 times, try and keep those backup linemen out of those tough, tough pass blocking situations. So, sorry, I'm getting all dried up here. Yeah, I'd sit Dak and Witten, but I'm playing Zeke for sure. And Amari, in case this ends up as another high-scoring game, I think you're fine playing Amari in this matchup. Although the Packers do allow the second fewest fantasy points to wide receivers, but with Michael Gallup maybe coming back, I doubt he's going to be 100%. So I think they're going to kind of need Amari Cooper, especially if the Packers end up putting up some points. And to finish out here, the NFC home games, we got the Cleveland Browns going to play the San Francisco 49ers. 49ers coming off of a bye. Telvin Coleman's status still up in the air. If Coleman plays, I might avoid playing him in my lineup with how well Breida, Mostert, and Wilson have been playing this season. They're in no rush to give him a full workload, so I wouldn't be surprised if he was active if we see all four of these guys get, maybe 5 or 6 carries. Plus, the Browns have been pretty tough against running backs this year. They allow the 10th fewest fantasy points to running backs. They played Derrick Henry, Le'Veon Bell, Todd Gurley, and Mark Ingram, so they've played some good ones, and they, that top 10 ranking definitely holds up. Kittle has been, he has the best matchup in this game. The Browns allow the 8th most fantasy points to tight ends, but not that Kittle needs a good matchup to be great, but like Ertz, he hasn't been all that dominant so far this season, averaging about 55 yards a game, no touchdowns through the first 3 games. Maybe on this bye week, Kyle Shanahan looks at this Browns defense, sees how tough they are against the run and sees the weakness against tight ends and maybe puts in some more plays to try and get George Kittle going here this week. He's a big part of that offense, and they could use him for sure. So that's going to do it for the NFC home games. Stay tuned and check out our 3-team parlay of the week, and then we'll rock out with the AFC home games. So stay tuned. Chris Navarra is here with his 3-team parlay of the week. It has been a rough season for us so far here on the Beers and Bruisers podcast as far as the 3-team parlays go, but Chris, you're here with us again this week. Thanks for coming back. What's going on, and who are the picks that you're liking this week?
All right, so far we've been off to a rough start, but it all takes is 1 week to hit. We're going to get the money. I'm zeroed in on 3 games this week. First game is I love the Bears -6 over the Raiders in London. I just see, the Bears defense is going to be too much for Derek Carr and the Raiders. Just like a couple weeks ago when the Raiders played the Vikings and they got killed. I just see the Bears being too much, even with the backup quarterback. Second pick, I like the Vikings -5.5 over the Giants. And almost kind of the same thing with this game. I like the Vikings defense against the young kid. The Giants have kind of shown some life the last couple of weeks, but the Vikings are a different animal than the Washington Redskins and Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So I see the Vikings defense shutting them down enough, and they'll still run the ball. Dalvin Cook will run all over the Giants. It should be an easy cover. And the last game I'm looking at is the Chargers at home, -6.5 over the Broncos. And this game, the Chargers are getting Melvin Gordon back, and Eckler's been a beast all year. Denver, I just don't see Denver being able to score enough points to keep up with the Chargers. I mean, they just stink. They have no weapons on offense. Flacco stinks. And the Chargers have a good defense. So I see those 3 games as really easy covers. Like, we're not even going to sweat these out. We're going 3-0 this week.
I like these picks, man. I like the Chargers. They're getting Melvin Gordon back, and Bradley Chubb is now out for the season, so that's one big-time player on the defense that they don't have to worry about anymore. There's been all these rumblings from Minnesota about Diggs wanting a trade and Thielen being upset that they're not throwing the ball deep, and Cousins going on the radio and apologizing and all that crap. So I think the Vikings go out and put up some points on this bad Giants defense. And the Bears-Raiders game, Bears -6, I think that's great. Of course, we have a...
Revenge.
Yeah, we got some revenge going on for Khalil Mack against the Raiders. So I think this is a good setup here. I just want to highlight some of the over-unders that I was seeing this week. Chris, I know you're not the biggest fan of betting unders particularly, but Bills at the Titans under 38.5 to me makes too much sense, especially if Josh Allen's not going to be playing. We saw the Titans defense has been playing pretty well, and we saw them give up 9 sacks to the Jacksonville Jaguars a couple weeks ago. This Bills defense just made Tom Brady look pretty bad. So I think these two defenses are going to shut it down. I think 38.5 points is a good number there for an under. And then the Bears-Raiders, like we said, I think the Bears defense is going to put a whooping on the Raiders, and they're going into this game with their second-string quarterback as well. So a couple, really good defenses playing on Sunday that I think you can, make some money on them as well. So, Chris, thank you very much for coming back on the podcast, bringing us your 3-team parlay of the week, and hopefully we hit, and we'll get you back on next week for the Week 6 edition. Good luck this week.
Thanks for having me, man.
And we're back with the AFC home games here, starting off with what used to be one of my favorite games of the week, Ravens at Steelers. Back in the day, Troy Polamalu, Ed Reed. These games were so much fun. And Ravens are just as exciting as they used to be to me. Lamar Jackson with a 2-pick game last week, but he still had an awesome fantasy game. They did lose to the Browns, but going forward, he should be in your lineup every single week. You should never take him out. I know this wasn't his best game of the year, but he is the man. I love watching him play. Ingram with only 13 touches last week after averaging about 17 touches throughout the first 3 games. But I don't expect the Ravens to have too many games like this on defense. I think they're going to step it up. They haven't been playing all that great on defense so far this season, and I think that's going to change this week. Mark Andrews led the team in targets again after being questionable all week. If you're one of those guys with the Andrews-Kelsey combo or Andrews-Kittle, I think you're good to go ahead and trade one of them, get what you can, maybe another starter at a different position and just ride with Andrews every week because he's legit as well. Looking at the Steelers here, Jalen Samuels was playing like some kind of Cordell Stewart 2.0. He was 3 for 3 passing with 31 passing yards. He had 10 carries for 24 yards and a touchdown. Then he caught all 8 of his targets for 57 yards. It's 19 fantasy points in our half-point PPR leagues. James Conner left the game at one point with what looked like a hamstring injury. Then Conner was being evaluated Tuesday morning for an ankle injury. He didn't practice Tuesday or Wednesday. I think he didn't even practice Thursday. So I think if he misses, Jalen Samuels is going to be a monster. As I mentioned, the struggling Ravens defense, they're in the top 10 in most receptions and receiving yards allowed to running backs, and the 6th most fantasy points overall to running backs. So I think either one of these running backs, Samuels or Connor, I think they both can have nice games just like they did last week against the Bengals. I know the Bengals defense is a little different, but I think Jalen Samuels, especially in FanDuel lineups, is going to be somebody that is going to give you a nice return on your investment. He's probably going to be pretty cheap. Moving on to a game that I'm really liking the under on. If we were just doing the 3-team parlay of the week, Bills at Titans. Bills coming off of that rough loss against the Patriots, where Josh Allen threw 3 interceptions. Titans coming off of a big win in Atlanta, 24-10 for them. A.J. Brown impressed again. He had one good game, 2 duds, and then one really good game so far this year. With 94 yards and 2 touchdowns on only 3 catches last week. I'm still not buying it, though. This team has been frustrating to us fantasy owners over the years as far as wide receivers go. I don't think we're ever going to see a wide receiver on this team with, 12, 13 targets like you see with Michael Thomas or one of these other dominating wide receivers. I think they're still way too obsessed with Corey Davis and trying to maximize whatever they can out of him. He's been given opportunity after opportunity. They just signed Adam Humphries this offseason for a reason. We saw in week 3 he got 9 targets. So this season A.J. Brown has a 15% target share on this team. I'm not comfortable adding a guy that's used that little on an offense that wants to run the ball and a team that that wants to rely on their run game and their defense. So I'm not buying into this guy just yet. Yeah, two touchdown, 94-yard game looks very nice when you're skimming through the waiver wire on Tuesday morning, but I'm staying away from him. As far as the Bills go, the Bills put up a hell of a fight against the Pats last week. And like I said, if it weren't for those 3 interceptions and Josh Allen leaving with his concussion, getting knocked out of the game, I think the Bills might have had a chance to pull this one off. Frank Gore entered the 15,000 rushing yards club with a nice 100-plus yard game on 17 carries last week. I think they're going to look to rely on that again. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. They took way too many deep shots with John Brown and Zay Jones, who both caught less than half their targets last week. I think if the Bills had concentrated a little more on the intermediate, part of the field and not just try and bomb it every time, they would have had more success. So if Allen takes care of the ball and if he continues to use his legs, which we've seen him be a very good fantasy quarterback in games because of that rushing ability, but he's got to keep them in the games and allow the defense to keep them in the games and not put them in horrible situations by turning the ball over so many times. And also, I think this could be the game we see Dawson Knox break out. He's got the best matchup of the game. The Titans allow the 5th most fantasy points to tight end, so we've seen him make some really nice plays over the past couple of weeks. If you're a Good Morning Football fan like me, saw him last week on the angry runs. He just trucked a dude after stiff-arming another dude to the ground. He looked great, and then he against the Patriots made a whole bunch of plays. So, excuse me. So, yeah, I like him this week against the Titans defense that has been kind of vulnerable to tight ends so far. Then we got the Bears going to London, jolly old London, to go play the Oakland Raiders. That is a hell of a travel for a home game for the Raiders to go from Oakland all the way to London. But, hey, that's what it's like when you're trying to expand the league internationally, as they would say. David Montgomery with a 24-touch game versus a really good Vikings defense. And they lost their starting quarterback in the middle of the game. He went down. Actually, it was like first quarter that he went down. He's doubtful going into this game. I don't think he's going to play. I expect a very similar workload as far as Montgomery goes this week with a backup quarterback playing. Chase Daniels came in. He didn't look all that bad, to be honest. Completed 22 of his 30 passes, had 200 yards and a touchdown. So he can definitely keep the offense on track and let these running backs do their thing. Cohen scored and saved his day, but he is definitely trending down. You look at Tariq Cohen's career catch rate is 75%. In the last 3 games, it's 43%. With Cohen only seeing like 3 or 4 carries a game, he needs to catch these targets in order for him to remain as a sustainable fantasy running back to us. Also, the other thing I think going into the season was a lot of people were expecting, all of the RB targets were going to go to Cohen, and Montgomery would kind of be the next Sonny Michel, where he's just really not used in the pass game, but that hasn't been the case so far. Tariq Cohen has 14 targets so far this year, whereas Montgomery has 12, so they're both being used in the pass game, and it seems like Montgomery is really only being used in the running game. Tariq Cohen did have 5 carries last week, but I think if they weren't I think they're going to really rely on these guys this week, especially traveling all the way to London. The Raiders' defense has not been good at all, really. So I think it's a good game for the Bears' defense. And plus, we saw 2 weeks ago the Raiders have allowed 8 sacks over the last 3 games, and you know who's coming in on the Bears' defensive line, Mr. Khalil Mack, looking for some sweet old revenge. Yes. So I'm expecting a good game from the Bears here. Looking at the Raiders, after 2 games with 10 and 12 touches, Josh Jacobs was given 19 touches, and he gave us 100 total yards. So the Raiders are going to need a good game from him versus the Bears. He's not going to be putting up numbers like this against the Bears, but he's got to at least keep the chains going and keep, they got a positive yardage, in order to stay balanced and be able to, run the offense the way that the coaching staff wants to run it and not have to throw the ball to Darren Waller what was it, like 16, 15 times or whatever it was in Minnesota, I think, week 3. With Tyrell Williams still dealing with an injury, it's still limiting him, and Waller has led the team in targets 3 of the 4 weeks so far, so he's gotten 10% more of the target share there than Tyrell Williams is, and I think he's going to see very close to what we saw from Jared Cook last year, which was a really good season from a tight end. So congratulations again to you, Darren Waller, winners, guys who picked him up after week 1. He definitely looks like a guy that in PPR leagues especially is gonna have a great year. Another AFC West game here. We got the Broncos going to the Chargers. The Broncos only ran the ball 15 times against the Jaguars. It's no surprise. Jags have been one of the best defenses against the run over the past couple of years, but with no Jalen Ramsey last week, the Broncos tried to win the game with their pass game, and they were doing it until the third quarter when Fournette kind of took over. Sanders and Sutton with 9 targets each. Sanders with the 100-yard game and Sutton with the 2-touchdown game. The Chargers are tough against running backs catching passes. The Chargers are in the top 10 in the fewest receptions and receiving yards allowed to running backs. These Broncos have a 25% target share between the two of them, that being Royce Freeman and Philip Lindsay. Maybe this is the game that we see some of those targets go from the wide receivers to the running backs. Maybe we see 5-6 targets each to Sanders and Sutton, and we see more like 6-7, maybe 8 targets go to these running backs. So I'm excited about playing these running backs in PPR leagues. I know I picked up Royce Freeman, who was sitting on the waiver wire in one of my leagues. You can't give away these running backs early. You just don't know what it's going to look like. And if you look at last week, Philip Lindsay was only targeted once to Royce Freeman's 6. So not a bad pickup. In his only game versus the Chargers last year, Philip Lindsay had over 100 total yards and 2 rushing touchdowns on 15 touches. So take that for what it is. If you're one of the guys that likes to, look at players against specific team history and whatnot. This might be the game that we see the 50-50 split start between Eckler and Gordon. I expect the Chargers to ease Gordon back in with how well the other Charger running backs have been playing this season. I'm not sure what the roles will be for Justin Jackson and Tremaine Pope, who we saw had a pretty good game last week, but I got to believe it's pretty much just going to be Eckler and Gordon, maybe 90-95% of the touches, and then they bring in these other guys just as a quick little spell for Eckler and Gordon. I think Eckler is still a good flex. It's a good matchup for running backs. Broncos allow the 4th most fantasy points to running backs, and now that they're down Bradley Chubb, not so much in the passing game, but definitely in the running game. Bradley Chubb definitely hurts them there because that dude was playing pretty well. I think you can keep Eckler in the flex because Gordon's probably not going to return to a featured role for another couple weeks anyway. So even if Eckler's role gets shrunk down to 12 to 15 touches a week as opposed to the 16 to 20 that he's getting right now, he's still going to be worth it. The receivers had an awesome game. Phillip Rivers had an awesome game. 80% completion, 310 yards, 2 touchdowns, including a really nice play where he was scrambling out to his left, and he drew the linebacker off of coverage, off of Tremaine Pope, and then he just kind of dumped it off to him and scored a touchdown. It was a really cool looking play. So Rivers is playing well, and they're going to need him to continue to play well because now apparently they're going to be down Dontrell Illman, who's on injured reserve, with Mike Williams and Travis Benjamin both out of this game. Inman was given a great opportunity against the bad Dolphins defense, and he played well, caught 5 of 7 targets for 76 yards, but he's gone now. So we had gotten pretty used to seeing Keenan Allen getting 12-plus, 15-plus targets over the beginning of this season, which wasn't really needed last week. They were able to have Inman come in and take half of that workload from him, and they still won the game. But if all 3 of these guys are going to be out again in Week 5, Keenan Allen should be a monster again. I expect him to have another one of those 15-target games. He's pretty much the only one left, especially with Hunter Henry still on IR. Or he's actually not on IR. I'm sorry. He's just out. So we got the Colts playing at the Chiefs. Colts coming off of a loss to the Raiders, 31-24, and the Chiefs were able to scrape out the win against the Lions, 34-30. It was 21-10 at half, 24-10 after the Raiders' first possession in the second half. So Marlon Mack was kind of limited. He had an ankle injury that was nagging at him, and he was somewhat phased out of the game early with that score being what it was. And the Colts just kind of fell behind. Mack, with only 25% of the RB targets, which only make up 17% of the total target share on the team, and the Colts defense that is nowhere near as good as it was last year. I think Marlon Mack can kind of get phased out of games way too easily. He's just, he doesn't get used in the pass game, and with this defense being bad, they're probably going to find themselves in a couple negative game scripts compared to what they were last year. So it's going to be on Marlon Mack and this really good offensive line to take control of the games early and to keep them in the games. As long as the score stays close, I like Marlon Mack, but if we start seeing multiple weeks of them getting down early, I might be looking to try and sell them high or sell them for whatever I can. I think the Colts are going to look at what Kerryon Johnson was able to do last week, 125 rushing yards against just Marlon Mack, and this offensive line really needs to take control of games. With no T.Y. Hilton in Week 4, we saw Jack Doyle lead the team in targets, and we saw him score. Ebron also scored. He only caught one of his 5 targets, but it was for a touchdown. If T.Y. Hilton misses again, I'm starting Jack Doyle for sure in my full-point PPR league. If T.Y. doesn't play, I think Zach Pascal and Nyheim Hines also gain some value, especially in DFS and FanDuel and whatnot. But it does seem like he's in line to play. He was able to practice. And if T.Y. does play, honestly, I think I'm still going to hold on to at least Jack Doyle just to see, how well T.Y. looks and how healthy he really is, because you never know with these quads and hamstring injuries. They can always come back, and they can be limiting throughout the entire year. So kind of a sloppy game for the Chiefs, really. 3 fumbles. Watkins, McCole Hardman, and Darrell Williams all lost a fumble. Williams salvaged his day by maximizing his touches. He had 43 receiving yards on 3 catches, and then he had 2 touchdowns on his 8 carries. So he played really well in the absence of Damian Williams. McCoy still led the team in RB touches. He gave us a nice 16-point game. I think McCoy remains as the top running back in Kansas City if he stays healthy. I think Darrell Williams is worth a play anytime either McCoy or Damian Williams misses, and it seems like both of these guys are pretty injury-prone so far. So I don't know if he's worth a stash on the bench or if he's just somebody that you really keep an eye on. But if either one of these guys were to miss, that being McCoy and Damian Williams, I think Darrell Williams is well worth the play. Anytime you're playing in an offense with Mahomes and Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, just such an explosive offense, you're going to see minimal defenders in the box all the time. So it seems like RB situations, Andy Reid's system is kind of like Kyle Shanahan's in that they're very friendly to running backs. So these are guys you're going to want to keep an eye on no matter what. I think both McCoy and Damian Williams owners should consider Darrell Williams as a solid handcuff in case one of them were to miss. You look at the Colts versus running backs. They're allowing the 8th most points to running backs, the most receptions, the 4th most receiving yards. Andy Reid definitely knows how to throw the ball to his running backs, so this could be another one to target in those full-point PPR leagues is going after these Chiefs wide receivers. These Chiefs running backs. And kind of an off day for Mahomes, really, in Week 4. He only had 18 points. Last year, he only had 3 games with less than 20 fantasy points, and 2 of them were blowout wins where their running backs just kind of took over. So I'm sure Mahomes will be fine, but it was kind of strange. I played Mahomes in 2 leagues last week, and I won both of them because he didn't have his best game. Looking at the Cardinals at the Bengals. So David Johnson with a big game last week. He's got the best matchup in this game. The Bengals allow the 2nd most fantasy points to running backs. I like Fitzgerald in what could be a shootout in this week, especially considering Christian Kirk may not play. Fitz with 3 straight 12-point fantasy games week 1 through 3, and then a 7-point game last week. But it was in a tough matchup, so don't start freaking out thinking the old guy's starting to break down or anything. Those NFC West matchups, they played the Seahawks. Those are tough games. The Bengals are actually pretty good against wide receivers, allowing only the 9th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. But I think without Christian Kirk and with Larry Fitzgerald, they're just gonna feed him the ball. I think it's gonna be the Fitz and David Johnson show. Looking at the Bengals here, with John Ross out until week 12 or 14, he left the game with a shoulder injury, could miss 6 to 8 weeks, and AJ Green still yet to practice. This team is gonna have it's gonna have to count on Tyler Boyd and Tyler Eifert and Auden Tate, who's seen 16 targets over the last 2 weeks. He is now the second wide receiver in Cincinnati, and these running backs as well to catch the ball for them to win this game and for them to get out of this hole of bad play. So the Cardinals D completely sucks at defending pass catching running backs. They allow the 9th most receiving yards to running backs. So maybe Giovanni Bernard is also a sneaky little DFS play in Week 5. He had 6 targets last week. But this game has the matchup of all the matchups, the Cardinals versus tight ends. You look at the Cardinals versus the tight ends so far this season, they are allowing the most fantasy points to tight ends, and they're in a class of their own. They allow not only the most, but they allow the most by far. Now, how bad exactly? So if you look at the Chiefs, who allow the 10th most fantasy points to tight ends, it's 8.6 points per game, okay? Then the Buccaneers allow the 2nd most fantasy points. So from 10 to 2nd, Bucs allow 12.1. So that's a 3.5-yard difference between the 2nd and the 10th team as far as fantasy points allowed to tight ends. The Cardinals allowed 19.8 a game. That is more than that's 7.5 points more than the next crappiest team at defending tight ends. They're absolutely horrible. You look at what they've done so far this season. Week 1 against Detroit, they allowed T.J. Hawkinson to catch 6 of his 9 targets for 130 yards and a touchdown. In Week 2, the law firm in Baltimore of Andrews, Hurst, and Boyle caught 10 of their 13 targets for 127 yards and 2 touchdowns. Week 3, old-ass, broken feet, Greg Olsen caught 6 of 7 for 75 and 2 touchdowns. And in Week 4, we saw Will Dissly and Luke Wilson catch 9 of their 10 targets for 83 yards and a touchdown. So they're just getting beat up by tight ends. Long story short, the matchup is great. Play Tyler Eifert. Not only are they going to have to rely on him because of the lack of healthy bodies in that receiving group, but the matchup is just too great to ignore. So in a league where I have Hunter Henry and I've been kind of struggling at tight end, I've been streaming tight ends. I think week 2 I played Eifert and he got me a touchdown. So I think he only caught like 1 pass for 2 yards and a touchdown. But hey, it's a 7 or 8 point game, so I'm fine with that. Then I think week 3 I went with Jack Doyle. He also scored a touchdown. That was week 4. And then this week I'm going to be going with Tyler Eifert for sure. Especially if T.Y. Hilton plays, then I'm going to get away from Jack Doyle and go with Tyler Eifert. If Hilton doesn't play, then I'll have to really reconsider that decision. Maybe I will end up going with Doyle there, but we'll find out. And the last game here, the last AFC home game, we got the Falcons at the Texans. Falcons lost versus the Titans 24-10. Texans lost to the Panthers 16-10. So the Falcons' run game got shut down early in this game by the Titans. They jumped out to a 24-7 lead by halftime. Only 14 total carries for the pair of the Atlanta running backs, Freeman and Ito Smith. Freeman had 12 of the 14. Ito Smith got the goal line carry on the 2-yard line. He converted, got the touchdown, but Freeman was targeted 9 times to Ito's 4 times. So far this season, if you look at the splits between the touches of these two running backs, Freeman with 47 carries to Smith's 13. Freeman's got 157 yards to Smith's 74 yards. Freeman's got him beat in snap count. He's got him beat in the target share by far, really. He's catching, he's catching almost 20% more of the passes than Ito Smith is. However, Ito Smith is beating him in yards per catch. So maybe we see them kind of start using Ito Smith a little bit more in the pass game and try and get away from using Devontae Freeman that much. I mean, 9 targets last week to go with his 12 carries. I know they want to keep him healthy. He's been injury-prone his entire career, so we'll see how that works out so far this season. It's looked like it's Freeman's backfield, but Ito Smith is definitely nipping at his heels. My man Austin Hooper last week with a big game, 130 yards on 9 catches. Right now, the Texans' defense isn't good or bad at defending any one position except for tight ends. They allow the second fewest fantasy points to tight ends. But I'm playing Austin Hooper anyway because honestly, I don't believe that number. I went back and I looked. So this is the Texans against tight ends in Week 1 against New Orleans. Jared Cook caught 2 of 3 for 37 yards. In Jacksonville, Week 2, 7 of 8. 7 catches on 8 targets for 42 yards between James O'Shaughnessy and Greg Swam. In Week 3 against the Chargers, without Hunter Henry there, they allowed 1 catch on 3 targets for 13 yards to Lance Hendricks. And then in Week 4 against Greg Olsen, 2 of 4 targets for 5 yards. So they really haven't played any good tight ends yet. So I'm not getting scared off by that number, Texans allowing the second fewest fantasy points to tight ends, because they haven't played anybody yet. So I think Austin Hooper is going to go in there and beat him up pretty good. I am playing him in one of my FanDuel lineups, and I'm excited about it for sure. The Falcons also have not yet faced one of these dual-threat quarterbacks like Deshaun Watson. Falcons so far this year against quarterbacks Cousins, Wentz, Brissett, and Mariota. Yes, Mariota's he's mobile, as they say. He had 22 rushing yards, but on the season they've only allowed 33 rushing yards to quarterbacks. And I think this is the week where we see Deshaun Watson bust out those legs. Watson has been really good so far this year. 2 games with 3 touchdowns passing, and then he had 3 of 4 games with a rushing touchdown. But I think this is the week at home. The Falcons allow the 10th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. I think he's going to exploit that. The Falcons also allow the most receiving yards and the second most receptions to running backs. However, throwing the ball to running backs is not something that Deshaun Watson or this coaching staff wants to do. The running backs in Houston only have a 14% target share. But a lot of times with those targets, it's just dumping the ball off to the running back if everybody else is covered, and hopefully it makes a guy miss and you have a broken tackle or two. So maybe rather than a running back dump off, we just see Deshaun Watson decide to take off running. Very similar situations. So I think this is a big week for Deshaun Watson. I think this may end up being a shootout here in Week 5. I think it's going to be a lot of fantasy points to be had. So it's definitely going to be a game I'm going to keep my eyes on. So that does it for Week 5. Got the 3-team parlay in this week, and I'm really confident about it. So hopefully everything goes our way. Make sure you tune in next week, Week 6. As always, may the fantasy gods be cruel to your opponents.
You have been listening to the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. For more episodes and information, follow us on social media and tune in every week. Beers and Bruisers is available on Google Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Alexa, Reach TV, or your favorite podcast service. Beers and Bruisers is a proud member of the HC Universal Network family of podcasts. To find out more about this and other great shows on our network, visit us online at hcuniversalnetwork.com or download the free HC Universal Network app today. Fantasy football is fun, but gambling addiction destroys lives. If you or someone you love suffers from gambling addiction, please do not be afraid to seek help. the National Council on Problem Gaming operates a national problem gambling helpline network. Contact them today at 1-800-522-4700. Thank you for tuning in to the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. Please remember to drink responsibly and always look for your man downfield.